Greetings, and we're so grateful that you're able to tune in. This is In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We are continuing our conversation. Senior Lecturer of Indian History and Indian Diaspora Studies at the Department of History, UWI St. Augustine campus, Dr. Sherry Singh graciously agreed to continue sharing her knowledge and insight, and we are very happy for the opportunity to continue speaking with her. Dr. Singh, one of the things that we spoke about was when in the last conversation, push factors and the fact that there was much more, some people say it have more in the mortar than the pestle, and there was so much fine print. And people talk about the devil in the details, but I think the devil outside the details too, looking at systems and systems of oppression, because it's more than just individuals, but you create a system to have groups of people in opposition to each other where someone thinks that they have they can operate from more of a position of strength in terms of what it is they're bargaining for. And then you realize, no, that's not the case. But looking at the way that people pitted against each other from jump, it seems, what are some of those places of interaction that you would have seen Indians start to interact or engage with formerly enslaved Africans?
I believe that as soon as the Indians started moving off the estates, yes, a lot of the initial settlements were largely Indians. But you do have situations where Indians moved to areas where you did have where Indians moved to areas where you already had settlements of Africans. And from my interviews with people, African people, Indian people, I've never come across someone on that one-on-one interview with their one-on-one interaction, African with Indian, Indian with African, who says something negative. And I was, and initially I was quite surprised that this is the trend because, the large pictures that you have this racial undercurrent. But when you speak to people one-on-one, it's all good relationship. They talk about how everybody, as we say in Trinidad, live as one. I go out there, they attend, they go by their neighbor for Diwali, you go by your non-Indian neighbor for Christmas, you go by your Indian neighbor for Eid. There is this, they live together quite amicably, quite, sometimes very lovingly. So there was interaction from very early on. As time went on, you had different points of interaction. For example, even in those places where you had, let's say, essentially an Indian village, when they were revolving around agriculture, they tended to be quite insular because everybody worked in the village. You had schools in the village. Even those people, when they had to interact with the larger society, let's say when they go to the market, you'd have that kind of interaction, and even then, again, one-on-one, good reports. I think large-scale sort of interaction, sustained interaction started to happen around when there was sustained movements away from agriculture. So let's say during the oil boom period, now also go back a bit, 1950s, a little bit before even late 40s, you had the rise of Indian denominational schools, Hindu and Muslims. So of course, more Indians are more comfortable now to be educated. Prior to that, you had the Presbyterian schools, yes, but Indians were suspicious of the agenda of conversion. So many people did not attend those schools because of that. Some did. But when the Hindu and Muslim schools started to open, they were more comfortable, they went, and of course now you had a rise in the acquisition of secondary education also among Indians. So by the time you got to the 60s, the 70s, you started, and now of course those people who were educated, especially up to the secondary and maybe less so the tertiary level, they did not want to stay in agriculture. So now Indians from the 60s, even before, but I'm talking about large-scale movements, started to move out of agriculture into the professions. And of course, that's where you would have a lot of mixing because you have everybody out there. It's not just Indians they're meeting all the other groups in society. So you have that kind of that mixing also. So I do think that the 60s, the 70s, together with the oil booms and of course the movement away from agriculture was a very defining moment in terms of interactions of Indians with other groups. But that is not to say that interaction was not happening before.
And you say that, and some of the things that jump out to me are one Black Stallion talking about the very humanity of people coming into play. And when you are trying to fulfill base needs, if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the things that are filtered out and the things that you pay attention to, they don't have these distinctions that people who are trying to keep people apart try to enforce upon them. So your very humanity shines through when you are trying to be human. And also, I'm very grateful that you made the point that at points in time, insularity would have been a function of uh, the community in terms of things that were happening, as opposed to one group feeling differently from another group. This is just the way that this is functioning at this point in time. So if you're not adding to this group in the way that it is functioning like that, we look at you a little differently. And last but not least, that suspicion of, for me to be a part of this, I need to change everything about myself in terms of like my whole cosmological viewpoint, which is something that may have sustained me to where I am at this point. And you're saying that my children need to do this? No, man, I'm going to watch your little cookie eye.
Yes, yes. And that was what the Indians were faced with. Glad you brought it up. They had to strike a balance between not losing their Indian selves, as you said, that tradition, that life, that self that had sustained them for so long. That's who they were. They weren't prepared to give everything up. So initially it was all right, if that is what is required, we will kind of keep hold to it. But then over time, with interaction, assimilation, adjustments that all diaspora groups would have to make it, they realize, okay, gradually there are certain things that that can be flexible, but what you call the core values and the core practices and beliefs, they were kept. So adjustments were made over time, and they managed to find that space, that balance between being Indian and being Trinidadian, or being both. Now we have the idea of Indo-Trinidadian. Yeah. So it was crucial that they find that balance to be able to retain the Indian self and also to become that Trinidad persona.
And it's and I continue thinking and looking at examples where things may have happened one way or another way in a different perspective. And I'm seeing where it could have been easier for one wholesale adoption certain ways because you didn't necessarily see that much of a difference in some of the African experience, especially if you look at, say, like Kikongo principles, where there is the cross, there are certain sort of things that lend very well into Christianity. But then again, there's also the argument that especially if one would have existed before the other, who's actually borrowing from who?
Yes.
So it's just, okay, well, this is what you're doing. All right, no, well, we know this. This is what we live. You just have a different face with it. All right, so it's easier to be assimilated certain ways or to appear that way. But I really like that point that you made of what it means to be yourself, what it means to be Indian, what it means to be Indo-Trinidadian. And that leads me to the question of asking about who validates a person? How do you derive your sense of self? Where do you root your or anchor yourself from? Do you think that has changed for members who are a lot more of the Indian or Indo-Trinidadian persuasion at this point in time?
I think that is a question that applies to all groups in the Caribbean, because at the end of the day, we are all diaspora peoples, except for, of course, the First Peoples. All the other groups came from somewhere. So that sense of self, it is like a pull. You ask about specifically Indian. If like I ask my students all the time, so you're talking about people around 20 years of age 20 to 22. So tell me, what do you feel about India? Just to put it bluntly. You have some of them who still I'm like, I want to go there. I feel this, it is where my traditions came from. They don't really tell me it's where my forefathers, but it's where my traditions came from. And then there are those same age. No, I have no, there is no connection. There is no inclination. I'm all Trini. Yeah, Trinidad is home, India is not home. So there is a mix, even if you take one age group, it's not something that we can generalize about. I do think that it is a personal thing, what you feel about your ancestral homeland, whether India, Africa, China. And then, of course, what it does, and in terms of identity, now you can say, so we have different definitions of identity. And that's true. That's another lovely problem of being a diaspora people, because I might tell you, okay, I feel a pull towards India, and my sister might tell you, well, no, I feel nothing. But that doesn't make me less Indian, make me more Indian, or make her less Indian, or make me less Trini and make her more Trini. Because I think all our people, not just Indians, we have managed to carve out that space, that identity, and we are comfortable with how we've carved it out, in the sense that we see ourselves, and I use Indians because we're talking about gender identity, but I would say it applies to all. We see ourselves as Trinidadians, Indo-Trinidadians or Afro-Trinidadians, but also, so even that is a layer. You have Trinidadians. Some people say I am Trinidadian. Some will say I'm Indo-Trinidadian. Some will say I'm Afro-Trinidadian. Then you would have the layer of connectedness to the ancestral homeland. So I do think, yes, their identity is not a singular static something concept. It changes over time. It is
And
dynamic.
don't
Yes.
don't go any further right now, Dr. Singh, because I want us to take a short break and then we come back with more. We are speaking with Dr. Sharian Singh, a Senior Lecturer of Indian History and India Diaspora Studies at the UWI St. Augustine campus. Stay with us. We come back after this. Welcome back. We are speaking with Senior Lecturer of Indian History and Indian Diaspora Studies in the Department of History at UWI St. Augustine campus, Dr. Sharian Singh. And we took the break while we were discussing identity. And sometimes a question that I ask to myself, is identity more tied to who you are in terms of ethnicity, uh, nature, or is it more tied to actions, what I do and nurture? Because and I'll take even like my father, for instance, he is resigned to being randomly searched on a very consistent basis when he flies to the States, because I laugh and tell him that he looks like a shaved down Taliban in terms of like his makeup, his mix, and his even more so his brother, my uncle, is somebody who would make roti without a bailna. If you see that man mix a batter for pylori, and he has the technique in terms of like he grab the batter and then squeeze it out, and it rolls off his finger into the oil. He's showing me how to separate the bigger ball and flour and into my lawyer and let it rest and all these kind of things. Still don't have it in my hand like Uncle Albert, but and what do we do that makes us who we are? Is it who we are in terms of like the way that we look? Is it what we do? So that identity is something, and sometimes I think it's also a kind of decision as well. This is
I
what I
think
choose.
you answered your question, because identity is all of those funnel, all of those combined to make your identity. Ethnicity is part of your identity, but it doesn't solely define your identity. Yeah. Your values are part of your identity, that also, and of course your values would inform your actions. Yeah. So I do think identity is a combination of your values, your traditions, your actions, your beliefs, and therein, of course, your ethnicity, your religious beliefs, your various kinds of beliefs, your experiences, also extremely important in creating your identity. So, like, for example, let's say Indians moved from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, so many years ago. The identity, the sense of identity that an Indian who left India to come to Trinidad would have would be so different from, let's say, a cousin or a sister that he left in India. So it is a concept that is very multi-dimensional. A lot of elements, your experiences, what your beliefs, values, your ethnicity, and not specifically because we're talking about, okay, this is my physical ethnic makeup. That is one only, but you have so many other dimensions of ethnicity. Ethnicity erases one component of ethnicity. Yeah. So it's so many. So your experience, ethnicity is a very lovely, identity is a very lovely problem that we have to work out. We all have to work out.
And then I'm even thinking of, I'm starting to think of Stuart Hall now with regards to some cultural studies. He talks about the eternal other. So someone who may be considered less of something, less African, less Indian, less whatever, in one situation, if they move to another situation, they may be considered more. Because so like even like me having to wrap my head to say, okay, well, I'm talking to this person, so I'm going to say Moringa instead of saying Saijan.
Yes.
And these kind of things. So it is really a very interesting, kind of situation, looking at nuance, looking at context, looking
Mhm.
at the area that someone is born in, and then possibly moving out of the situation that you're in, and you realize, oh, I know this. Oh, I have this understanding without even really thinking about it because it kind of came in by osmosis. I'm
Mhm.
used to seeing Jandis. I'm used to seeing Shivlignums. When I'm at this person and I see their flag, yes, it's a Jandi. Or I'm at my spiritual Baptist family and I say, okay, well, no, it's not Jandi. It's banners, not even flags. It's
Okay.
banners. But having this level of sensitivity and respect, I think, is
Mhm.
really that is a base layer in terms of
Yes.
like operating with this level of respect, moving towards having better understanding.
Yes, and you're right. That level of respect, that level of sensitivity, and a level of awareness of the other, not simply saying, okay, they're different, so they're not just othering them, as you say, but they're different, so let's see why. Let's try to understand why. And not just different, yes, they're different, but you have similarities as people, as human beings, And like you said, you have to pick between when you say Saijan or Moringa. Similarly, in the process of integration into the society, Indians had to do the same thing, but maybe the flip side of what you are doing. So they might say a word, maybe let's say about the 1940s, at home they call roti a roti, but out there they would kind of keep it to themselves. The experience of many Indians that they were uncomfortable in primary schools, especially government primary schools, eating their roti. So they either wouldn't carry it to school or they would hide it in a little paper bag and then under the desk and take a bite so nobody would see it, because at that time Indian things, roti, would be ridiculed. So same way, it's the idea of navigation. What do I do in the space that is mine, that I'm comfortable with, as opposed to the space of the other that maybe I'm not comfortable with, or I feel as if I'm not accepted, or they don't know me, that area of it's like a gray or black area almost, where each group they don't know each other, but there is no effort to understand. So we do, in our society, in a society like ours that's so multicultural, we have to adopt those attitudes of awareness, of respect, of sensitivity, um, because as I said, people generally they have a good relationship. When you speak to people one on one, there is this sense of camaraderie and relationship regardless of the race and so on. So it depends on how you want to look at the otherness, whether you want to perpetuate it or you want to bridge that gap. And yeah.
And once again, that comes down to choice and decisions. But
Mhm.
in navigating these narratives and navigating the understanding, we have about 3 minutes more. Dr. Singh, give us a little idea about the work that you do at the UWI, please, in terms of what are some of the studies, because you spoke about going out and doing research and
Yes.
so give us a little bit of that side, please. So in terms of moving from generally or these conversations or concepts to what it
Mhm.
is you do on a day-to-day to continue this work.
Okay, when you say you, do you mean me specifically or the Department of History?
You,
Okay,
because
me.
even when you're doing your research, yes,
Yes.
you're operating from an academic perspective, but a lot of the time, academic
Mm-hmm.
study is fueled by a personal interest, and that is
Yes.
something that also helps to sustain when you're
Yes.
saying this study thing kind of yeah. So personally,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes. So I don't know, I think from a child, I grew up in a very, very traditional Indian home in a village that was all Indian. So you grew up with those values and those systems. I remember being at the age of 5, my grandfather used to teach at the village temple, teaching Hindi. And so by the time I was 7, I could read and write Hindi. And I always had this is everybody loved their religion and culture, but there was something about it that I was just so absolutely passionate about. But growing up, even as a teenager, I would have my own relatives tell me, I would just be wanting to go to the temple to learn and all of that, religious knowledge, the Hindi language. And they would say, but you can't make a profession of it. This would not get you a job, and they would really, as we say in Trinidad, boof me about it, quarrel a lot. So, I kind of fell in line, and I got to the University of the West Indies. I found these courses. I'm like, really, so for all my life, people were saying you can't do anything with it. There is no pathway forward. And here it is. So I did my PhD in Indian history, and it's here. So I'm here now. So I think I am engaging my first love. Let's put it like that. In that sense. It has, I was lucky enough that it materialized this way. So I lecture on courses on Indian history, and also Indian diaspora studies, but my passion is Indian diaspora studies, where I get to explore, the experiences of the Indians, not just in India, but what has happened. And that's, for me, that's the more dynamic part, because so much has happened and so much is happening. So I do the teaching, undergrad, postgrad, and at the PhD level also. And of course, I do my research. I am on sabbatical right now for a year. So I, again, me being my inquisitive and reading against the green self, I am focusing on right now, on reading against the green or re-examining colonial policy as they apply to Indian indentureship. So I've done some research at the British Library. They have so much information if anybody wants and can go to England. Oh my God, so much. And what makes it easy is now you don't have to sit and write. You can just take pictures, so you can come back with this wealth of information. So that is what pushes me, because in many areas, I don't want to repeat the same story, repeat the story of how the Indians came. I want to look at it, yes, but from a different angle, because I'm focusing on telling the narrative of the people, how, from that inside perspective, from the people's perspective, how policies would have affected the people, so that's what I'm focusing right now on. So reading against the green and trying to understand the system and the experience from the perspective of people and how it impacted on them, a lot of which, is not out there fully. So that's what I'm focusing on.
And I think it's really
And
a
I'm also
beautiful
doing
thing.
some research on Indians in Jamaica.
Eh, I think it's a beautiful thing when you're able to come back, because like the song said, I've been to everywhere, but I haven't been to me. Me saying
Mm,
come being able to circle back to your first love, I think it's
yes.
truly a beautiful thing. So I rejoice for you. And I want to thank you so much for the time that you would have shared. Because a lot of times when we talk, okay, there's something for Indian Arrival Day, but it seems as though that is all there is, as opposed to this living, breathing thing that we would have spoken about, that history is, because it totally informs present and how we can go forward, giving us windows into what we can be should we make that decision. You see that word again, decision. So we want to
Yes.
thank you very, very, very much, Dr. Sherian Singh, Senior Lecturer of Indian History and Indian Diaspora Studies at the Department of History, UWI St. Augustine Campus. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.